Hello, everybody. Christian Barnes, Better Homes and Gardens, Kansas City Homes. Let's talk about unrepresented buyers. I hope you watched my video about shared compensation because that kind of leads right into unrepresented buyers, right? I think the as I call them, the people on the scenic route that are trying to hold on to buyer agent compensation being negotiated on the upfront. Some of that is a little bit misguided because what they're trying to hold on to is the notion of being able to what we call in the industry double-sided transaction when there is an unrepresented buyer. And I mentioned in the video about shared compensation about the conversations right now about that being kind of grossly self-serving. And this is a prime example of it when we start talking about unrepresented buyers. And if the conversation that we're having with sellers about unrepresented buyers is completely self-serving, we're approaching it from the wrong way. Absolutely the incorrect way to approach it. The reason that we are concerned about unrepresented buyers are real. And that is if we have an unrepresented buyer, if we have somebody that chooses not to have buyer agency representation or a licensee assisting them, and instead they choose to have the listing agent, the licensee that's has an agency relationship with the seller and has fiduciary duty to the seller, there's a lot of risk there. There's risk there for the agent, for the brokerage, for the seller, and even for the buyer. There was a statistic that we found last week for one of the major E&O carriers in the country, and I cannot think of it off the top of my head. If I find it, I'll put it in the comments on this video. But 71% of litigation surrounding real estate transactions, in 71% of cases, it's with a party that wasn't represented. Think about, let that sink in for a second. That is a big, big number. And thus it is a big risk. It is a big risk to the seller and it is a big risk to the buyer. Are we going to have buyers that come mid-August, all these changes that they're hearing about, and they maybe don't really understand them, but they're hearing about them and they're hearing, oh, I could just call the listing agent. I'm going to save a lot of money on the purchase of this house. Well, are they? They're going to save some money on the upfront, but in the long run, they might not. And they might not save money on the upfront. They're not going to know who to call for inspections. They're not going to know who to, the dates and the contingencies that are in the contract that they have to meet, their obligations that are in the contract. There are so many things that go into a transaction that they just aren't thinking about, that it is our job as an industry to educate them and educate them on the value that we provide. It's not just opening doors and driving around and looking at cool houses because we like to. It is far more involved with that. But in our conversation, I want to circle back to in our conversation with our sellers as a listing agent about unrepresented buyers, I think the conversation and in our exclusive right to sell moving forward, we're going to have some language and some coverage in there for our agents around unrepresented buyers, because there is a high risk to those. And thus, as an agent, we need to have some compensation built in for risk management and risk mitigation for an unrepresented buyer. And that to me is a very easy conversation to have with a seller and an easy thing to build into your listing agreements. The other thing that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about, we're talking about how the buyers are now going to be requesting compensation for their brokerage fees from the seller upon offer. But if you have an unrepresented buyer, what's to say that the seller can't ask the buyer to cover those risk mitigation fees? There's no reason that a seller can't ask the buyer to pay compensation for their brokerage fees. So, and that's where I come back to the notion that an unrepresented buyer is going to save all this money on the upfront. Maybe not. Maybe we're actually going to have sellers that kind of turn the tables on them and say, okay, you want to be unrepresented? I'm having to foot the bill here for the risk mitigation. You're going to foot the bill for that because I wouldn't have to take that on if you had agency representation. So I probably rambled too much here and talked in circles. Hopefully you kind of grasp that. I'm happy to dive into that more. If you want to reach out to me, happy to talk through it more and happy to show you the language that we've come up with in our exclusive right to sell to protect us and to protect our sellers. First and foremost, it's about protecting our sellers and doing what's right for our clients. And I hope you all will agree with me on that one and kind of change the way that you're thinking about unrepresented buyers to, instead of it being a self-serving conversation for an agent, think about how we kind of turn and and look at that conversation and look at that compensation in a totally different light. Hopefully that helped you. We'll see you on the next video. Take care.